It's 160 years since the infamous murder on Mitchell Downs, and there's a real quirky side to this story. G'day there, Harold.
Oh, yeah, good morning, Danny. Yeah, a bit quirky and very surprising because the murder of Mitchell Downs, there's a surprising record that it set, which I'll tell you about.
Tell us about it now.
Yeah, look, the murder on Mitchell Downs, that was the attention-grabbing headline in the Ipswich newspaper on the 5th of May, 1863. And you're right, that's 160 years ago this year.
Wow.
And it became probably the biggest crime story in Queensland for the mid-19th century.
Wow.
The chief constable at Condamine in the Western Downs was John Devine, and he'd written a letter to Edward Quinn, his counterpart here in Ipswich, and it found its way into the newspaper. Now, Ipswich's Chief Constable Quinn had earlier arrested the nude maniac in Ipswich in 1860. I've told you about that. He would rise to fame by leading Ipswich gold escorts from the Tulloom diggings, and his house at 84 Lime Street, built in 1860, is still there today.
Wow.
But the news from Constable Devine was something else altogether. Because the manager of the Mitchell Downs station, which is 300 miles west of Brisbane, had been murdered.
Right.
And Devine gave a full description of the old man he believed responsible. And the alleged murderer, he was well known to the Ipswich police.
Wow.
And he was an Irishman called Michael Turley. And Devine described him as around 70 years old and a pensioner of the British Army. He had arrived in the Moreton Bay colony in 1850 and appeared in court charged with drunkenness 7 times in his first 7 months here.
Wow.
His troubles continued in Ipswich and they never stopped. Now, Turley had been a sergeant in the cavalry and was considered somewhat eccentric. At the time of being accused of murder in 1863, he sported a very long white beard that flowed down, covering the whole of his chest, and his long white hair on his head hung down over his neck and all down his back.
Wow.
And so when riding, he always had 2 swags on his saddle, 2 guns strapped on in front of him, 2 pistols on his person, and a couple of dogs tied to the saddle. Now, Turley, with this distinctive appearance of being armed to the teeth, was well remembered passing through town just months before the murder.
So can I ask this question? Can I ask, you might know, they must have been able to carry weapons those days.
Well, that's right. It wasn't common because this never has been in Australia. But absolutely, he rode through town with 2 rifles on the saddle in front of him and pistols on him, and that long flowing white mane of his beard and hair. He could not be missed.
Wow.
And Ipswich remembered him well and truly. And even when after a couple of months, when he was working as a shepherd on Mitchell Downs, that's when he got into a disagreement with the station manager, Gordon Davidson. Davidson was a former magistrate from Maitland.
Right.
And Turley took offence to something that Davidson said about his sheep. So Davidson naturally shot him through the head and killed him. And then went on the run for more than 2 days. And his long white hair was streaming in the wind as he rode. Now, the infamous Lieutenant Frederick Carr of the Native Police tracked Turley to the Benango station. Now, 6 months earlier, Lieutenant Carr and 21 of his mounted troopers had passed through Ipswich en route for the Maranoa, which is where they found Turley. When they cornered him, Turley raised his pistol, but thought better of it when the troopers all pointed their carbines at him. Anyway, Turley was taken to Toowoomba, and from there he was brought to Ipswich, where he was held in the New Stone lockup overnight before heading to Brisbane by steamer the next morning. Now, Turley's trial was held in Toowoomba. It was one of the highest profile trials in Queensland up to that time. Queensland's first Chief Justice, James Cockle himself, presided. Queensland's first Attorney General and the Member of Parliament for Ipswich, Ratcliffe Pring, he prosecuted. And the former member for Warwick, Gord Jones, defended. Now, Jones had an affinity for Ipswich, having raced a lot of his horses here a number of times. Anyway, Turley did not put up a defence. He was found guilty of willful murder and sentenced to death. And at over 70 years of age, he therefore became quite likely the oldest person ever sentenced to death in Australian history. And of course, it's a record that today will never be broken.
So how old was he?
Has that connection. He was, well, they weren't exactly sure, but he was over 70.
Now, I'm just going to sneeze. And this is test. No, I'm not. Yes, he's over 70, and he used to ride around with 2 rifles and 2 pistols. He must have had a bit of shell shock from World War One or something. He's a lunatic.
Well, might have been a war before that, because this was in 1863. But
Exactly.
then, if you want to know more about Michael Turley,
Yes.
then make sure you're in the studio next week, because I'll be telling you a lot more of his amazing story. And there's a twist in the tale to come that I guarantee you're not expecting.
Mate,
There's more on Michael Turley.
Michael Turley, the oldest man recorded to this date ever sentenced to death in Queensland
Sentenced to death.
or Australia? Queensland.
Well, I haven't found anyone sentenced to death older in Australia.
Mate, Paul Tully.
I'm happy to be corrected, but I haven't found him.
Paul Tully loved your story last week. We've got to get this book out about the history of Ipswich. There's so many great yarns. Now, how do we find this story and others?
Yeah, all these yarns go to historyouthere.com. I'll post this part 1 of Michael Turley up tomorrow morning, but historyouthere.com, and you can get there via all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. Historyouthere.com.
Historyouthere.com.